Jai Hind and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. As you can see, I have with me Lieutenant General Rakesh Sharma, somebody who's going to explain to us what's happening within China with regards to the recent standoff with India and the impact on the foreign policy. Sir, good afternoon, and I'd like to just take a minute to give a short intro why this topic came to my mind is because recently Dr. Jaishankar actually mentioned that, when the armed forces are strong, the foreign policy becomes strong. That brought me to a thought. If the Chinese have actually faced a humiliating sort of a retreat, what impact will it have on their foreign policy vis-a-vis India and, of course, many other things? So, thank you so much for joining me, sir.
Thank you, Adi.
So, what would you say to the intro I spoke about? I mean, it's of course a relative discussion. It's not a direct comparative in any way. How do you foresee the impact of this sort of a standoff? Let's focus towards India with regards to Chinese foreign policy towards India, sir.
So, finally, the importance in China is of the CCP, Communist Party. It is the ideology of communism which is more important, and that actually overshadows the importance of all other policies, because foreign policy and security policy are also being managed by the CCP. So the ideological makeover or ideological standing of China is the most important, and that the people have to be convinced that there is a ideological standing, and that actually is what is the basis of Chinese policies. Now, if you're referring to Yangtze, what has happened recently, if I take it correctly, and you said China had a humiliating retreat. Now, firstly, Yangtze is not new. It's been happening earlier. I will not say it is routine, but it has happened earlier. It happened in previous years also. Maybe not this larger strength, maybe lesser strength, maybe not in the month of December when it's too cold, maybe earlier, but this has happened earlier. Would the Chinese not have known that we are located on top of Yangtze Ridge? And when the Chinese will come at midnight or daytime, whatever time, they will be confronted with a post which is based there. They may know the strength, but they may also know that we would be prepared to fight it out. And if that is so, why did the Chinese land up there? And was it a humiliating retreat? These are very emotive questions. If the Chinese knew that they were coming to Yangtze, there is a Sanger wall there. There is a kind of wall made by us, and our troops are located. They would have seen by satellite. They would have seen by drones. They would have sent earlier. This force is not landing up there in the vacuum. Having known all that, they reached on top, and they did the last time also, year before last, year before last, and they came this time in the era of post Eastern Ladakh issues, and then they went back. So is it a retreat, or they just came to convey a message to us? Because they brought a large strength. They know there will be fisticuffs, there will be a melee there, there will be a brawl, and finally they moved back. While we did very brilliantly, our troops, the two units there, did brilliant job, and they pushed it apart, pushed them away, and also the QRTs were there. But I think it is Chinese also had a method in this madness in conveying that we have interest on the Yangtze Ridge, and we are conveying our interest yearly basis, year on year, that we have, despite what has happened in Eastern Ladakh, elsewhere, in the areas of contention, we are registering our issues there. Please note that this ridge is also ours to have. And they have gone back. Now, to the peoples of China, there is a social contract. A social contract is that we will improve your standard of living. We will work to that end, that you have better life in times. You support our ideological moorings or the political moorings of the Chinese party. I agree that there may have been some media reports on social media of the Chinese, which they have picked up from what's happened on the Indian social media or the international social media, and worked up on this one. But fact is that if you see what has been said in Global Times or said in the official media, they have conveyed their version of it, and they said peace and tranquility and all that things which have no meaning, and they have gone back into their own way. I am not convinced that the Chinese have had a retreat, I thought they may have done what they wanted to do and go back. We did brilliantly well, honorably discharged the responsibility of pushing them back into their shell, into wherever they've gone. Let they come back next time or next year or whatever.
It's interesting that you say the message. I actually wanted to take this up a little later in the program, but I'm going to press you on it. Now, the message, of course, is something that we understand that the Chinese are probably trying to send a strategic message as well as a tactical message on the ground. Strategically, probably because India has G20 and a whole lot of other things going for itself. So probably just to put a little pressure there. And tactically, of course, as you mentioned, that they have this particular claim that they kind of want to readdress. What kind of surprises me is that they have the claim in the entire line, right? Why would they choose a place where, in spite of all their ISR and everything like that, they knew that India would also be ready? Why would they choose a place like that? And as a matter of fact, it also tells us a certain amount about our intelligence capability, that we were ready in the place where they were coming in. So why this? I mean, it kind of they could have actually sent a harder message by doing something else, or was just going and coming back the entire plan, sir?
So Young said they have been coming back. They have the memories of Thagla Ridge. They would have memories of Samdrong Chu, and it must be rankling in some of their minds as to what has happened earlier in history on Samdrong Chu and Thagla Ridge. So Yangtze is an issue. There are 8 odd areas in northeast where there is bones of contention: the fish tails, the Madan Ridge, the Asfala, Rakula. I mean, there are 7-8 places where they could have come, and they would be coming. This is a ridge where it dominates. It is a very dominating ridge. It looks on the either side. Our occupying of Yangtze must be rankling in their minds much more than any other of these other areas rankles. And I'm sure that we will. They have not put a full stop to it. They will be back in some other time in some other places. So let's not bask in the glory of what we did in Yangtze. That's important, but there would be more to fear, more to watch forward in many other areas, including the central sector. So be it. This is not a finished game, and it's not a full stop here.
Not in any sense. As a matter of fact, it's well known that the Chinese would keep trying it, and now the expectancy, as a matter of fact, when Ladakh happened, everybody said look out for the east. Now everybody's saying, yeah, look out for the sugar sector, because that's where the next issue is going to come.
Or so now I want to or sugar sector, or I'm saying Uttarakhand Tibet border, the areas of Mana, Malari, and Barahoti, and all those areas.
Barahoti. Yeah. So, which again, I'd like to take you to the foreign policy aspect of it. Now, India is going to be in the lead role for certain international organizations, multilateral organizations, which are going to impact a certain amount of the trade policy, at least the economic and the trade policy in the global south. A lot of eyes are on India today to try and see, because India has been the balancing factor for the past some time. It's been able to create that little space, especially with the war happening in Ukraine. So there is, I won't say it's an established third voice, but there's a slight hint of a third voice coming out. How would China deal with that? Considering, when we saw Prime Minister Modi and Xi Jinping shaking a hand, a lot of people said he walked first. Fair enough. The hand got shook. There was an icebreaker that happened. Let's look at that as a perspective. How does China take this forward, knowing the fact that Indian population and Indian political capital will not be wanting to actually invest anything until and unless things do become kind of sort of normal?
So the normal, this is the new normal. There is no normal other than this normal. And I mean, I do not want to say that the shaking hands was not important. It's very important. It was different from what happened in the SCO, where you saw that they stood, the principals stood next to each other and did not exchange words. At least ostensibly, it was did not exchange words. But here in G20 in Indonesia, in Bali, they did speak some time, and whoever spoke first is not material at all. But actually, that did happen. But the Bali got subsumed by the Biden G talks. because
Yeah.
the abiding problem in the world is the relationship between United States and China. And then there are good omens that came out of Biden and Xi talks. Suddenly there was a transformation, despite what happens in Nancy Pelosi's case and all this Taiwan thing, and what the Americans made immense amount of noise. Here there was positiveness. Yes, we will be competitive, but we will also cooperate in large number of fronts in future, kind of message which came out. So that it was the Bali summit. Bali summit got subsumed largely by this meeting, which was most important. Now, your question is valid about India. See, if you say 6 months ago when we said, okay, one of the G20 will take place in Srinagar, and the Chinese made immense amount of noise, and you can't go to Srinagar because of obvious reasons, because of, in their contention, disputed territory or whatever. Now, will it suit the Chinese to allow Indians to rise to the global front and have a successful G20? Look at what they've done recently in the SIDCA meeting, in which they called 19 countries of the Indian Ocean Rim to China to have a discussion under the SIDCA forum, in which they called Australia also, and of course, and Maldives also. When many people landed up, maybe there were Indian businessmen there. There were Indian businessmen who spoke there. So, Indian government was not invited. Last year, what they did it in South Asia. They got countries of South Asia together in Chengdu, which is Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh. And they said, okay, we will look after you. And they made a reserve established in Chongqing and in Chengdu for themselves. So they are working in multifarious ways to undermine India in whichever way possible. So when we say there is a foreign policy, the foreign policy, if you follow their foreign policy and the systemic of their foreign policy, well, they are marginalizing India in the Indians' own backyard. It's important to notice it. The SIDCA conference, especially, it is worth noticing as to Indian Ocean region countries being brought together. So they are creating a legitimacy of their own in the global fora, and especially in the region around India and the ASEAN, which is the East Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Southern Asia, and of course Indonesian region, and creating a kind of global leadership for themselves. Whether they are doing by deep pockets or doing by making relationships or doing by whichever manner. Look at the visit of President Xi. We can debate it to Saudi Arabia. I think there is trying to build up a new cultural shift altogether to commerce and trade in that manner. So I think the Chinese are looking for power, global power. They're looking for global legitimacy. They're looking for global leadership. And of course, they are working towards wealth. Whether they succeed or not is a separate issue,
Different.
but they are working to that end.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, that's a different discussion. We're just trying to analyze what the Chinese are trying to do.
Yeah.
They succeed or not, of course, there are 100
Yeah.
billion factors where things would go
Absolutely.
right or wrong for them. So, which brings me to my next thing. You mentioned Saudi Arabia, which actually which brings about an issue about the larger strategic game between the US and the Chinese. Now, it is being termed as, I won't say the global south, because a lot of the global south countries don't want to get into this entire thing. But it's like the West, the collective West, versus Russia and China. And it was Iran, but I think Iran has had a little bit of a crossbow with China after the Saudi visit. But that's what the thing was said, that it's Russia, China on one side. India is, they used to say that India could teeter towards the Russian side, and the collective West on the other side. It is a well known fact that with the position that India has today, whichever side that we step on is going to be the heavier side. The Russians, of course, would not want the Indians and the Chinese to get into a tango at this point of time, because they want both of them to be together so that they can get that particular support. So there's going to be a lot of pressure from Putin. Don't do this. It's not the right time. How do you see this entire game? Because the Chinese, at the end of it, to get their position out against the US, the economic position out, the dollar dominance, as what it's called, would need India.
So Chinese are in a long game here. They are not short-term players. They have a plan for everything that they do, and we must grudgingly accept it. Today, they have dominant trade partnership with 140 countries of the world. You
Yeah.
can imagine the count of domination they have. They have nearly undercut the United States in the dollar deal, de-dollarization of petrol in the Saudi visit recently, where they said, okay, the Shanghai Exchange will actually handle the fuel exchange on yuan. So there is a large amount of trade happening between Saudi Arabia and China,
Yeah.
and they say, okay, we pay you in yuan, and whatever you are buying from us, you pay in yuan. So there is a yuan trade. The whole the oil basket from 1944 onwards, and mostly after 1971 onwards, rests on dollar, petrodollar, as we have been calling when we were youngsters also. That petrodollar is becoming petro yuan. This is a dramatic shift, and I would worry more on the basis of petrodollar, which was providing security to the oil region, the geopolitical
Yeah.
security and geostrategic security to Persian Gulf and all that. And then the Americans a little moving backwards. Are the Chinese trying to fill the void in security in the Persian Gulf? And if they're wanting to do so, are they looking for some more bases? They're making a number of ports around Indian Ocean rim, constructing a number of Oman and Tanzania and Mozambique and Kenya. So are they wanting to spread themselves more? I think that will be cause of anxiety if the Chinese do so. And I think this occupying the void left by the Americans in the Persian Gulf will matter to us as much as anybody else, because despite the Quad, if the Chinese say, okay, we will base our fleet there, we'll base some kind of as it is, Chinese have, as it is unofficially said, retained 4 to 5 ships, naval ships in Indian Ocean closer to India at all times. So if they do so, if they want to establish more bases, then that will be a geostrategic shift other than Gwadar. I mean, Gwadar is burning, but they'll leave Gwadar alone to other places. And so I think there are geopolitical shifts, and I think I'll take up an issue with you, Adi, on China-Iran relations. Chinese are masters in working with countries which are inimical to each other. So there is a Iran-Saudi Arabia issue,
Yeah.
but they have a 25-year-old deal and multi-million-dollar trade agreements with Iran in the course of last year when President Xi visited and all that. So that is not going. So they have basketing things separately. Their dealing with Iran is something different to their dealing with GCC countries
Saudi.
and with Saudi Arabia. So there is a separate thing. I think we need to watch each one of these cogs being placed across there, and the Chinese working at this end with a great amount of caution and kind of worry.
Indeed, so one thing that I look at, and you mentioned this, that the withdrawal of the United States from, I'll call it a clean, simple withdrawal, because there's nothing else. A lot of people have termed it as a pivot to Asia, and all sorts of fancy words. I look at it as a clean-cut withdrawal where you've not been able to hold your ground for whatever reason that they're trying to do. That particular thing has opened up an opportunity for China, and I agree with you, sir. The point that I want to ask you about is that with this particular withdrawal, the pivot was, as I said, pivot was supposed to be with Asia, the South China Sea, the Pacific Ocean, and so on and so forth. But the pivot has actually gone back to Europe today. So for when if I'm a Chinese, I look at it like that and I say, "Yeah, keep fighting. What the hell do I care? Russia, kya chahiye? Bol. I buy all more oil, yeah. Take more money, no problem, because it suits me."
Yeah.
It suits me for my purposes, because till the time this fracas is on, I can actually do whatever I feel like.
Look, we go back to the basics when we talk about, it's all national interests, and every country moves on their national interests. That's a kind of dicta which is lifelong. Most of the Southeast Asian countries, which are important all around South China Sea, may have conflicting claims on South China Sea and all these other issues. But fact of the matter is that none of them want to take up an issue with the Chinese. They will say, okay, United States is good, yeah, it's a friend. But China is China, it's a neighbor. It's all around us. There is Chinese diaspora in most of the countries in Southeast Asia in such large numbers. So they cannot take an affront across against the Chinese. So they make a excellent balance between China and United States, who are those who want to do so. Now the Chinese and the United States having taken a step back is distinct. It's visible here. There is Quad, there is AUKUS, which has come across here, and of course now there is a talk about Americans coming into wanting to establish base again in Philippines, etc. Let's see how much that progresses. But the voids that the Americans will create will invariably be filled in by the Chinese where it is possible. So here we need to take a pragmatic view and say that I would speak like a military man to say, people will say, are you speaking like a military man? But the fact of the matter is that to a bully, we have to be strong enough to look into his eyes and say, okay, I can stand on my own feet. And we have to stand on our own feet. And that is where we can actually cause sufficient amount of deterrence. If we do not have hard power of this kind, even the foreign policy and the economic policies and all become subservient. The fact is that you require in a neighborhood that we have, you require strong hard power of a modern kind to be able to sustain your foreign policy goals and your economic goals and your social developmental goals to proceed ahead. That, I think, is the crux of the matter.
Indeed, and that's the most important thing, because at the end of it, the void which we are going to see, we can't fill it up. We don't have at the moment the capacity to just sit in all the places that the US is vacating. But there has to be a plan, which I find somewhere a little off. I want to take a question about the neighborhood before I come to my last one, sir. But the neighborhood is critical for India today, and we've seen one little thing. Pakistan is going the Sri Lanka way, in not in the Sri Lanka direction, but the Sri Lanka way, the Sri Lanka destination. Uh, Today there was news about there's no money to pay salaries and this and that and the other. I don't want to get into the tactical aspect of it right there, but you got an issue in Pakistan. Bangladesh is on the teetering edge. Nepal went through an election. Thankfully, I would say at the moment looks like it that things are a little stable there. The Sri Lankans are not able to break ice with the IMF. The Myanmaris, we've had two interactions with them straight after the coup which has taken place. Bhutan, of course, is quiet, but with the recent standoff in Arunachal, I think a lot of focus will go into the security of Bhutan because of the recent, I would say, acquired taste that the Chinese have had for that Satkeng sanctuary. So somewhere down the line, I really feel that the Chinese would try and in their foreign policy towards India would be a rather higher focus onto keeping the Indian neighborhood in a bit of a fritz. It suits them because if it's Indian neighborhoods and in the fritz, and the great power contingent would, the great power thought process would say that till the time your neighborhood is not strong, you can't become a great power. So that kind of tells you what the Chinese are planning for us. Would you agree for something like this, sir?
You made a very long charter. Adi, the fact is that Pakistan is theater of the absurd, and we can't debate them more than what is required, and leave them what the way are. We have a election, and we hope that Prime Minister Shehbaz Deva and Prachanda would meet together and join together and form a government in Nepal, which will be an advantage, which will be a good for us. There is a little feel of slight in Nepal. We need to address the issues. We need to address the issues in Nepal very keenly and very adroitly. The fact is that the Chinese are in a big way. They have large number of Confucius Institute. They have study centers on Mandarin all over. There is also
police stations, sir.
Police stations worldwide. Chinese have 4 lakh people, ex-PLA, demobilized, who have been converted into private security companies all over the world. So that is another game altogether. Police station is one small manifestation of the kind of security. people talk about that BlackRock and Wagner groups, etc. Chinese have their own Wagners all over the
Far
world.
ahead. Yeah.
They are masters in this game. What I'm talking about is the issue of Pakistan being in a dilemmatic state. We leave it, but Nepal I'm talking about. The fact is that Nepal is we should work at it. We should, if the Chinese want to make a railway across from Lhasa to Shigatse to Kathmandu, and it will take 3-4 years for them to make the tunnel under the Himalayas and come across here. We made a beginning last year. We made a beginning of about 60 odd kilometers of rail line pipelines. Let's pull it through. Let's work at it. There will be problems of land acquisition, etc., in Nepal. But let's say we work to the end to convert the railway from India to Nepal to a success story, even before it comes up with the Chinese decide to come across there. Let's sort out our road networks. There is one ICP created in Bihar Nepal border. We need to do better on creating the ICPs across on the borders in Nepal. If there is projects that we have promised over last 20-30 years that have not fructified, Pancheshwar Dam, etc., we need to work at it. Around 1, 2, 3 projects, these needs need to be sorted out at all. So, I mean, there is multifarious ways that we can do work with Nepal. Finally, I'm not saying roti beti, all the cliches of roti beti ka relationship, etc. Those are cliches. But I say we need to work. There is matching of hearts and matching of minds, which we need to exploit. All the other countries, like Bangladesh, has got very large weapon trade with China. Bangladesh, there are a lot of investments the Chinese are doing, as they are doing in Sri Lanka. So, and the roads that they have made into Myanmar, the road that takes off from Yangon and goes across to Mandalay, and the parallel that joins off from Rasina coast across to Mandalay and on to Kunming. These are changing the strategic geography of South Asia tremendously by what the Chinese are doing in this area. By geography alone, by the 5-6 roads that they're building into Nepal, by the kind of port work and the construction work being done in Bangladesh, including weaponry, Sri Lanka, everybody knows about, by Myanmar. Pakistan is a client state, so we'll not talk about Pakistan. So there are Chinese deep pockets making much inroads in South Asia, and we need to work at it. And we have a great amount of goodwill among the peoples of South Asia tremendously. In Sri Lanka, also in Bangladesh, in Nepal greatly. We need to exploit the good relationship and good warmth that these peoples of these countries feel about our country, and we need to exploit that and come up to otherwise the Chinese are in full-time job of getting them into a grouping. They made their own small little grouping of Southeast Asian nations and making their own kind of reserves for them to be exploited, and the meetings that they take place once in 6 months. I think we need to do our bit into our neighborhood well.
Absolutely, there's no question, sir. My last this thing to you, sir, the internal strength of a country always dictates its foreign policy. Today we see China, of course, they've gone through these large bit of protests. Of course, not a new phenomenon in China. Having done some study, I realized that protests are a very common feature in China. Of course, not these kinds. They are sporadic, localized protests. This was a little different. So protests. Then you've got this from zero COVID to hero COVID, and that's what I'm going to term it as, because that's something I came up with. Because they're now being heroes. They just want to open up everything and go back to work. And they're telling people, even if you have COVID, come to work. It doesn't matter. Chongqing is sent a circular to its factories that no leaves. It's creating chaos. It's not that the people are jumping to the factories. It's creating chaos. Supply chains are getting disrupted. They've not been able to set up their systems right for opening up. There are medicine shortages, whole lot of things. So there's a problem inside there, and it's not a problem that Chinese could wish away, right? It's not a problem that the Chinese could just cover up with using their firewall and stuff like that. How do you see the internal situation impacting their external strength, sir?
So there is anxiety about China, which has been pestering for quite some time. Before the 20th Party Congress, there was much issue there about the economy going down, the dual circulation policy, the common prosperity, etc. I think there was a deliberate thought process given across in China where they said, okay, for the people and for the political and the ideology, they were wanting to allow the economy to go down. It was a deliberate decision, I take it. They knew that the economy will get down, and they worked to this end towards politics part of it, the people's part of it, which they weighed much more. The equity, the inequalities of peoples were they thought more important than sorting the economy out. It was a deliberate decision. But as time has passed, you see, 20th Party Congress, we all said, and I also wrote somewhere that this will be more stringent in concerns. There will be the policies will become more strict because he's one man controlling it. Everybody else who has been elected in the 20 Party Congress is a person who belongs to the President Xi's own side. So there will be one man decision, more dictatorial nature. But there have been significant changes in last 2 months. If you see the changes in China, they have eased the COVID norms. They have eased the norms for the real estate. Real estate, which is 30% of their GDP, which was suffering tremendously, has now been some eased norms. There is Biden G talks that I've looked up and saying so, and the markets have responded well. So there has been a political change. But the peoples, as you rightly pointed out, the peoples have got a serious problem in many other issues. First is the COVID itself. The zero COVID having taken its toll, it is now very difficult to rebound back because of the mass COVID spread that is taking place there, and because probably the efficacy of their vaccine has not been so successful. So there are problems. And the elderly people did not take vaccines in China, which also affected this tremendously. So there is a serious vaccine problem. There is unemployment problem. There is a youth problem. The youth started saying, lie down, which they said lie down means I am not. I am not interested in life. I'm just going to lie down. And now it has transcended to the next spiritual level. Let it rot. The word that used in Chinese, let it rot. So they are so disenchanted with life. You can't have a youth of a country. And then, they said they overcounted about 100 million Chinese in demography, which means is that youth which they were counting that they have overcounted in census 100 million people, which actually comes to light is that they will become older much earlier than they'll do so. The Chinese are rushing against time. The 2049 is now seeming too far for them. So I would state here, Adi, the next 10 years are the critical period in China. It's critical for the Americans to make sure that the China does not rise to become its competitor in the world. It's also important for the Chinese to make sure that they rise in a manner that they become a competitor to United States in next 10 years. So this is an intensive competitive world in the course of next 10 years. Otherwise, the Chinese by 2035 will have severe demographic pressures, severe demographic problems, and they'll not be able to get out of it. To say that they'll wait for Taiwan to be absorbed in another 25 years will be too late. To say that the sovereignty issues with, say, or territorial integrity issues with, or the Indian borders can be sorted out in 20 years, 30 years, too late. So I think the Chinese have recognized that they have an internal problem of manifold kinds, and they need to resolve the issues of territorial integrity and sovereignty. Very important issues in China. They want to resolve because they have a history of being conquered like this. So they want to resolve these borders here. They want to sort out Taiwan and build out, if they have to achieve what they wanted to achieve by BRI, by other manners of things. So their policies, as they're going to transit now and onwards, are going to be immense importance. And end by saying that no nation can guarantee that the public will take all lying down. It's a surveillance state. Everything, every man's visuals are available to them. It has gone beyond just surveillance also because of the pictures that they've taken of most people. At one time there would be protestation, so they have to be very watchful. How does it manifest across toward India? That I think you asked, and it's a very interesting question. I don't think Indian, certainly we don't want a war. We are actually focused to reach our potential. We have tremendous potential, and we must aspire to reach a potential in the Committee of Nations. We have the capacity to do so. And we are, I think, moving also steadily and strongly in this direction. We also have socio-economic desires to have the peoples of India to rise. For China to allow us to reach our potential will be not right. If he allows us to reach our potential, then that will be a geopolitical challenger, which is a country which has got a 2,000 kilometers peninsula into Indian Ocean through which its trade passes. That will be contrary to Chinese vision of this entire. So we have not parallel lines together. We have conflicting lines. It may not lead to a war, but I'll end by saying here, Adi, that hard power matters. It matters in a manner to make sure that when tomorrow, if it happens, the worst happens, we are prepared to do so. While we will show ourselves wonderfully well on the borders, in the territorially, we have the capacity to do so. We need to have technological makeup of warfare in the modern realms of warfare, modern domains of warfare also in an equal manner, and show it so that we have the capacities. That deterrence has to be of quality, of that quality now. And if the Americans are calling it integrated deterrence in the new terminologies, then we need to integrate deterrence along with good friendly countries also. And I'll end there, Adi.
Profound words, sir. When you mentioned about the Chinese having a little bit of a precondition with regards to people invading them, and that's something which I find as a big problem between India and China, because we both have that history. We both will not
Yeah.
cede an inch of our land. As more nationalism grows in both the countries, and which is how it is when countries become more progressive and more economically sound, the next realization is nationalistic fervor, because you want
Yeah.
your country to be secure and stuff like that. That's what we see in the USA, that entire game. So when you look at that, this particular country, as you these two countries, as you very rightly brought out, have a huge challenge in front of them, because it's either him pulling us down or we pulling him down.
Yeah.
It's a dog eat dog world. So that's something that's there. But sir, thanks so much. I think this has been an
Thank
interesting
you.
episode, because we've kind of dwelled into a little bit of an unknown factor about the Chinese perceptions, and a lot and I purposefully took a little bit of a different line of questioning with you, because that's what is being spoken about. That one clash has happened, India has beaten China, now khatam ho gaya. That's not the case. It's La La Land. This will continue. This will probably happen, as I said, in Bharoti, or probably back in eastern Ladakh, some other place, or whatever it may be. And till the time this
Yeah.
thing is not sorted out, this will continue. Thank you so much for bringing that out, sir.
Thank you.
And looking forward to another conversation sometime soon for another analysis on Dev Talk, sir. Till then, Jai Hind.
Thank you. Thank you, Adi.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.